Tensions grew quickly after shooting victim Jimmy Lee Jackson died in the Selma hospital. Voting rights advocates first wanted to march to Montgomery with Jackson's body. The shooting by an Alabama state trooper had lit a fuse that was about to carry images of racial injustice to a stunned America and beyond. The Edmund Pettus Bridge crosses the Alabama River in downtown Selma. It's named after a man who was a Confederate colonel, a U.S. senator, and the Grand Dragon of Alabama's Ku Klux Klan. A march from Selma to Montgomery had to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but this steel landmark became a brutal and bloody barrier for a march that began just 10 blocks away at Brown Chapel Church.
I got involved in the march as a very disobedient 8-year-old child. I lived in George Washington Carver Project, which was very adjacent to the historic Brown's Chapel AME Church.
When I went over there and realized that there was this whole crowd of policemen and called Dr. King and Ralph, and they were in church. And I said, you know, they're not gonna let us march. He said, well, they're probably gonna arrest everybody, so don't all of you all go to jail. So we sort of drew straws to see who was gonna lead the march.
And I am so scared. I mean, because the violence was in the air. Even though they said they were going to arrest people, you could smell it, you could feel it.
At 8 years old, Cheyenne Chrisberg holds the distinction of being the youngest marcher on that Sunday morning.
I remember vividly leaving my parents a note and even my funeral arrangements and trying to tell them in my own childish way why I had to march after being threatened so many times.
Those of us who led the march then were able to encourage others to follow.
As a church, we line up in twos, walking quietly, orderly, peaceful, no one saying a word. And when we got ready to cross over the bridge, Jose Williams, who was leading the march with me, looked at me and said, John, can you swim? Saw all of this water down in the Alabama River. I said, no, what about you? He said, yes, a little. I said, well, Jose, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump. We're going straight ahead.
And I knew the procedure. I knew when the line stopped, somebody would ask permission to pass. It would be denied. The front would go down on their knees and we would follow suit. Someone would say a prayer, and after prayer, we would stand up and go back to where we started from.
I could even remember people just coming close to the marchers and spitting. It was an ugly scene, but we followed instructions well. We kept our heads on. We kept marching.
We get to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers.
My heart was beating faster and faster because I knew something was going to happen.
You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue.
When Jose Williams said to Major Cloud, give us a moment to kneel and pray. The major said, troopers advance. You saw this man and others putting on their gas masks. And Jose Williams said to me, John, they're going to gas us.
And then we were asked to turn around, and the leaders at the front of the line refused. And after they refused, racism unleashed its brutality upon us.
They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, pushing and shoving us, and then tramping us with horses. They released tear gas.
But I remember most of the screams. People were screaming and screaming, and people were just laying everywhere like they were dead, bleeding and not moving, and you couldn't stop to help them.
People had begun to be beaten down with billy clubs. Dogs and horses had begun to push their way into the crowd. Tear gas had begun to burst in the air. People had begun to try to run for their lives.
Once that tear gas hits you, you don't have any sense of direction.
I saw a horse just run over a lady. The man hit her, I don't know, but I could still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement.
Not only were my eyes hurting, my ears were hurting. And I saw grown men on horseback with billy clubs the size of baseball bats, coming down on the heads of women and children and splitting them like watermelons.
I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. My legs went from under me. I thought I was going to die.
And the late Reverend Hosea Williams picked me up, and my little feet were still galloping in his arms. And I looked at him, very frightened, devastated, and I said to him, "Put me down, because you're not running fast enough."
Some of us will run out of the line because Jim Clark and his deputies, after beating us, pursued us. And we had to go all the way back to Brown Chapel Church.
The people came back to the church, and they're hysterical. People are talking about going home, getting their guns, and so go up on the steps. I go up, and a couple of others were up on the steps of the church, and we were saying to people, please go into the church. Don't stand out here. There's troopers and possemen out there. They got guns. They're crazy. This is dangerous. No, don't go home and get your guns. That's just going to give them an excuse.
We had turned the house next to Brown Chapel into a clinic. And the people who were bleeding or who need stitches or had been seriously hurt were sort of laid out over there.
And I do recall being back at the church, and someone asked me to say something, and I stood up and said, I don't understand it, how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote.
We invited our friends, people of goodwill, to come by and join us.
As the horrible images of Bloody Sunday flashed across network television and newspapers, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made a national appeal calling for ministers nationwide to come to Selma.
There was only one airport, and everybody that came into Montgomery that didn't drive, we had to provide transportation for them to Selma. So we had to facilitate carpools, housing arrangements, food, because the latter part of it, people were coming in by the hundreds, you know.
The outrage of Bloody Sunday got the attention of the Johnson White House, with the president being briefed on the phone the following morning by U.S. Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach.
Did we take every precaution we could have or should have? I think so, Mr. President. We had a large number of agents there. I had lawyers there on the scene.
We were working with the Justice Department, and they said that in order to get any federal protection, we had to have a court order from Judge Frank Johnson, the federal judge in Montgomery. And Judge Johnson had agreed to hear the case, but until he heard the case, we were prevented from marching.
In the meantime, Special Assistant Bill Moyers tells Johnson that Dr. King feels he needs the White House to do something.
There may be some tear gas ahead. Yeah. I say to you this afternoon that I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. Yes, sir.
On Tuesday, March 9th, a much larger group leaves Brown Chapel Church, with both blacks and whites marching side by side back toward the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
First of all, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't nearly as tense. The sense was they won't dare beat up all these weighty white people from out of town.
We decided that we would start and go across the bridge to where the others stopped and then turn around and come back.
You are ordered to stop, stand where you are. This march will not continue.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
The thing that was not scripted, the thing that was not part of the deal, was when the troopers all stepped back.
There was an understanding that in order to get a federal judge to give us permission to march, we had to show respect for his court, which we did.
I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.